The Road of Fate. Jack Callahan had been a trucker for most of his life, with over 30 years behind the wheel of his trusted 18-wheeler, Iron Titan. He had crisscrossed the country more times than he could count. The highways were his second home, the endless miles his constant companion. On this particular December night, the wind howled like a hungry beast, rattling against the sides of his rig. Snowflakes danced in the dim glow of his headlights, swirling like ghosts in the dark. The stretch of road before him was isolated, with no towns or rest stops for at least another 50 miles. It was the kind of lonely drive that made a man feel small against the vastness of the world. Jack took a sip from his thermos, the black coffee still warm. His daughter, Emily, had gifted him this thermos last Christmas, and even though she was all grown up now, with kids of her own, the little things reminded him of the life he had left behind every time he hit the road. The CB radio crackled to life, interrupting his thoughts. "Breaker, breaker, this is Road Dog. You copy, Iron Titan." Jack recognized the voice immediately, his old friend and fellow trucker, Sam Road Dog Patterson. Jack reached for the radio. "I hear ya, Road Dog. How's the road treating you?" "Cold as my ex-wife's heart," Sam chuckled. "You still on Route 66? "Yeah, mile marker 210. Got another hour or so before I pull into a rest stop." "Well, keep your eyes open, Titan. Some weird reports coming in from dispatch. Something about a vehicle abandoned near marker 186. No details yet, but highway patrol's been stretched thin tonight." Jack frowned. Abandoned car in this weather. That's bad news. Real bad. Could be a breakdown, but dispatch says no one's reported it yet. Jack nodded to himself. This wasn't uncommon. The cold could kill a car battery in minutes, and folks who weren't prepared could find themselves stranded fast. But in conditions like these, the real danger wasn't the car. It was the people inside. "I'll keep an eye out," Jack promised. As the radio chatter died down, he tightened his grip on the wheel. The wind was picking up, turning the snow into a near whiteout. His wipers struggled against the ice forming on the windshield, and Jack squinted to see through the flurry. Then, just up ahead, something caught his eye. A flickering red light. Jack slowed his truck, his pulse quickening. As he approached, his headlights cut through the storm, illuminating the scene ahead. A small car, its hazard lights blinking weakly, parked awkwardly on the shoulder of the road. Snow had piled up against its tires, half burying the vehicle in the frozen grip of winter. Jack pulled Iron Titan to a stop a few yards ahead of the stranded car, setting his hazard lights flashing. The hairs on the back of his neck tingled. Something felt wrong. No movement inside the car. No one waving for help. He grabbed his heavy coat from the passenger seat and reached for his flashlight. Before stepping out, he keyed into the CB. "Road Dog, this is Titan. I found an abandoned vehicle near 186. No sign of the driver yet. I'm gonna check it out." "Copy that. Be careful, Jack. You don't know what you're walking into." Jack nodded to himself, shoving the door open. The cold hit him like a hammer. It was bitter, biting through his clothes in an instant. His boots crunched on the snow as he trudged toward the car, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The car's front door was slightly ajar. Jack's gut twisted. That's not good. He peered inside. The driver's seat was empty. No luggage, no belongings, nothing that told him who had been here. But in the back seat, huddled beneath a thin, tattered blanket, was a child. A little girl. Jack's breath caught in his throat. She couldn't have been older than 6, maybe 7. Her small body was curled up tightly, her arms wrapped around herself for warmth. Her lips were a pale blue, her cheeks ghostly white. And she wasn't moving. Jack didn't hesitate. He reached in and gently touched her shoulder. "Hey there, sweetheart. Can you hear me?" She stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering, but she was too weak to respond. Jack's pulse pounded. She was freezing to death. Carefully, he gathered her in his arms. She was light. Far too light. The clothes she wore were thin, barely offering any protection against the brutal cold. Whoever had left her here had done so without a second thought. Jack didn't waste time. He turned and hurried back toward his truck, shielding her small body against the wind. As soon as he climbed back into the cab, he turned up the heater, wrapping her in one of his spare blankets. "Come on, kid, stay with me," he muttered, rubbing her hands between his own, trying to get warmth back into her frozen fingers. Her lips parted slightly, and in a barely audible whisper, she spoke. Mom said she'd be right back." Jack felt something twist deep inside him. Who in their right mind would leave a child out here? He grabbed the CB radio. "Road dog, this is Titan. I got a little girl in my truck. She's half frozen. Someone left her out here." Silence. Then Sam's voice, serious and sharp. "Damn it, Jack. You need to get her help now. There's a rest stop at mile marker 240. Get her there. I'll call ahead." Jack nodded, though Sam couldn't see it. On it, as he pulled back onto the highway, the little girl whimpered softly. Jack glanced at her, his heart pounding. "You're safe now, sweetheart. I promise." The road ahead stretched into the night, but for Jack Callahan, this drive had just become the most important one of his life. A race against time. Jack Callahan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his heart pounding like the rhythmic hum of Iron Titan's powerful engine. The little girl, wrapped in his spare blanket, lay motionless in the passenger seat. The only sign of life was the occasional shallow rise and fall of her tiny chest. Outside, the storm howled, lashing against the windshield as if trying to rip away whatever warmth remained inside the truck. The snow-covered highway stretched endlessly ahead, a frozen wasteland illuminated only by his headlights. Jack flicked on his CB radio. "Road dog, this is Titan. You copy?" A moment of static, then Sam's voice crackled through the speaker. Loud and clear, "Titan, what's the situation?" Jack took a deep breath, his voice steady but urgent. The kid's ice-cold, barely conscious. "Whoever left her out here did so in the middle of a goddamn blizzard. I'm pushing toward the rest stop at marker 240, but I don't know how long she can hold on." A long pause. Then Sam spoke, his voice unusually serious. "Jack, you don't have time to wait for an ambulance. Get her there and find someone to help. I'll call ahead to the diner. Maybe they've got a nurse or someone nearby." "Copy that." Jack glanced at the girl, then reached over, gently tucking the blanket tighter around her tiny body. "Just hang on, sweetheart." The girl stirred slightly, her lips parting. "Mom said she'd be right back." Jack felt something inside him twist. She was waiting for someone who had never returned. He swallowed down his anger. Right now, he needed to focus on keeping her alive. The time for questions would come later. The storm tightened its grip. The road was barely visible beneath the growing layers of snow. The storm had turned the landscape into a swirling white abyss. Even with all his years on the road, Jack had never seen visibility this bad. He flicked on his high beams, but they only illuminated more snow. His tires skidded slightly as he rounded a curve. He adjusted his grip, easing up on the accelerator. The last thing he needed was to end up in a ditch with a half-frozen child in his truck. Suddenly, a set of headlights appeared through the white haze, a vehicle up ahead, moving slow. Jack squinted. A pickup truck, hazard lights flashing. "Damn it," he muttered, slowing down. As he got closer, he saw a man standing beside the vehicle, waving both arms. The guy looked desperate. Jack hesitated. Every instinct told him to stop. Truckers helped each other out, but he had a child in critical condition in his cab. His priority was clear. He reached for the CB. "Road dog, I got a stranded driver up ahead, but I can't stop. You got anyone near mile 220 who can check it out?" "Hold on." There was a pause, then Sam came back. Yeah, Smokey's about 10 miles behind you. I'll send him over. Good, I'm not slowing down. Jack pulled into the opposite lane, his truck roaring past the stranded vehicle. Through the passenger side window, he saw the man's face, wide-eyed and desperate. For a split second, Jack's gut told him something was off about the guy. But there was no time to think about it. The girl in his truck let out a small, pained whimper. Focus on the kid. Jack pressed the pedal down harder. The rest stopped. A beacon in the blizzard. Mile marker 240 came into view. Jack spotted the glow of the rest stop's lights through the storm. A beacon in the dark. It wasn't much, just a diner, a small gas station, and a few motel rooms. But tonight, it was a godsend. He pulled Iron Titan into the lot, parking as close to the diner entrance as possible. Snow swirled violently as he climbed out, fighting against the wind. He yanked open the passenger door, gathering the girl in his arms. She was barely responsive now, her head lolling against his chest. "Damn it, kid. Stay with me." The second he stepped inside the diner, warmth washed over him. The smell of coffee, bacon, and fresh bread filled the air, a sharp contrast to the deadly cold outside. A few truckers sat at the counter, their faces turning toward Jack as he stumbled in, the bundled-up girl in his arms. The diner's owner, a stout woman named Carla, rushed forward. "Jack, what in the—" "She's freezing." Jack's voice was raw. "We need help now." Carla's eyes widened. "Bo, get the first aid kit, and get Sarah from room 3. She's a nurse." A burly man in a flannel jacket, Carla's husband, Bo, sprang into action, grabbing a medical bag from behind the counter. Another diner patron bolted for the motel rooms, disappearing into the snow. Jack carried the girl to a booth near the heater, setting her down gently. Carla knelt beside them, her face full of concern. "What happened, Jack?" Jack exhaled, his breath shaky. "Found her alone in a car, middle of the highway. No parents, no nothing. Someone left her there." Carla's expression darkened. "Jesus." The door swung open again, and a woman hurried inside, snowflakes clinging to her coat. She looked to be in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. "Sarah?" Jack asked. "Yeah," she nodded. "I was a pediatric nurse before I started traveling." "Let me see her." She knelt beside the girl, gently pressing her fingers to the child's wrist. Her expression was unreadable, but Jack could see the tension in her jaw. "She's hypothermic. We need to warm her up, but slowly." Jack nodded. "Do whatever you have to." Sarah carefully unwrapped the girl from Jack's oversized blanket. She gasped softly as she took in the child's condition, her fingers blue-tipped, her tiny lips cracked and dry. "She's been out there for a long time," Sarah murmured, her voice heavy with sadness. She reached into the medical bag, pulling out a small electronic thermometer. She placed it gently under the child's arm, watching the screen. A beat of silence. Then Sarah's face paled. "What is it?" Jack demanded. She swallowed. "Her body temperature is dangerously low. If we don't get her warmed up properly, she won't make it." Jack felt his stomach drop. "What do we do?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "We need warm towels, blankets, and hot water bottles. Fast. She's too weak to shiver, and that's a bad sign." Bo was already moving, grabbing supplies from the kitchen. Carla ran toward the back, yelling orders. Jack turned back to the girl, brushing a few strands of frozen hair from her face. "You're gonna be okay, sweetheart." His voice was rough, but steady. "I promise." The storm raged on outside, but inside this little diner, a battle for one child's life had begun. Jack had stopped for a reason, and he wasn't leaving until he made sure she survived. The shadows of the past. Jack Callahan sat stiffly in the corner booth of the diner, his heart pounding harder than his 18-wheeler's roaring engine. The storm outside showed no signs of stopping, snow slamming against the windows in violent bursts. But inside, everything had come to a standstill. The little girl, who had barely survived being left alone in the freezing wilderness, was wrapped in warm blankets, propped up on a seat near the heater. Sarah, the former pediatric nurse, was crouched beside her, carefully monitoring her vitals. Bo and Carla, the owners of the truck stop, worked in frantic silence, warming towels and filling hot water bottles to help stabilize the child's body temperature. Jack had been on the road for over 30 years, and he had seen a lot. Broken-down trucks, desperate hitchhikers, towns that felt like ghost stories come to life. But nothing had shaken him like this. Who the hell leaves a child to die in the snow? The question wouldn't leave his mind. It burned inside him like an open wound. Sarah let out a small breath, glancing up from the child. She's warming up, but she's still weak. We need to get her to a hospital, Jack. Jack nodded. Nearest one's 60 miles out. Ain't no way an ambulance is making it through this storm. Bo grunted from behind the counter. Then we waited out here. But you can bet your ass someone out there is missing a kid. Question is, do they actually want her back? Silence fell over the group. Jack clenched his fists. The girl had murmured only a few words since he picked her up on the highway. Mom said she'd be right back. That was it. No name. No details. Just a fragile, broken whisper that chilled him worse than the winter storm outside. The bell above the diner's door jingled. Jack's head snapped up, instincts flaring. A man had stepped inside, shaking snow from his coat, his thick boots stomping on the diner floor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a heavy wool jacket and a hunter's cap pulled low over his eyes. His face was rugged, but something about his stance sent an uneasy feeling through Jack's gut. The man looked around, scanning the room slowly. Carla was the first to speak. "Rough night, ain't it?" She offered a polite but wary smile. The man nodded, his voice deep and gravelly. "Yeah, got caught up on the road. Had to pull over." Jack didn't like it. The guy wasn't just here for shelter. His eyes had already darted toward the little girl wrapped in blankets by the heater. Sarah noticed it too. She shifted subtly, blocking more of the child from view. Jack leaned forward. "You just passing through?" The man hesitated, then forced a chuckle. "Yeah, just trying to get home." Jack didn't buy it. His trucker instincts had been honed over decades. He could spot trouble a mile away. And this guy, he had trouble written all over him. Jack's fingers curled around his coffee mug. "Where's home?" The man looked up, meeting Jack's eyes for the first time. Something dark flickered there. "Not far." "Liar." Sarah kept her hands firmly on the little girl's wrist, monitoring her pulse, pretending not to notice the stranger. But Jack knew she saw what he did. This man wasn't just lost in the storm. He was looking for someone. A name is finally spoken. The little girl stirred, her fingers twitching slightly against the blanket. Jack leaned closer. "Hey, sweetheart. Can you hear me?" She opened her eyes slowly, groggy and disoriented. Her lips trembled as she tried to form words. "Maggie." Jack's breath caught in his throat. A name. Finally, a name. Sarah smiled softly, brushing a damp strand of hair from Maggie's forehead. "That's a beautiful name, sweetheart." Maggie swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where's Mommy?" Jack hesitated. He glanced at Sarah, then back at Maggie. He wasn't about to lie to her, but the truth. The truth was something he didn't have yet. "You're safe now, Maggie." He kept his voice calm. "That's all that matters right now." But behind his steady words, the fire inside him burned hotter. Whoever her mother was, whoever had left her on that highway, was either in serious danger or had done something unforgivable. And Jack intended to find out which. The man in the hunter's cap cleared his throat. "Cute kid." Jack turned sharply, his patience wearing thin. "Yeah, she's lucky to be alive." The man shifted his weight, his boots scuffing against the floor. Then he did something that made Jack's blood run cold. He reached into his pocket. Jack was on his feet in an instant. "I'd stop right there if I were you." Bo, standing behind the counter, subtly reached for something underneath the register. The man paused. His hand came out slowly, empty, except for a crumpled photo. He tossed it onto the table. Jack's stomach turned as he saw what it was. A picture of Maggie. Jack's pulse hammered in his ears. His instincts had been right. This man wasn't lost. He was looking for her. Maggie saw the photo and immediately shrank back, her eyes going wide with fear. Jack's blood boiled. "Who the hell are you?" His voice was low, dangerous. The man's lips twisted into something that almost resembled a smile. "Her uncle." Maggie whimpered. "No." Jack's vision blurred with rage. This son of a asterisk was the reason she was out there. The diner was silent, the only sound the howl of the storm outside. Jack's voice was a growl. "Get out." The man tilted his head. "You don't understand." Jack stepped forward. "No, you don't understand. You left her out there to die." The man took a step back, but his hands clenched into fists. "I didn't have a choice," he snapped. "Her mother ran off, left her with me. I tried to take care of her, but she kept running away. I was just trying to teach her a lesson." Jack had never wanted to hit someone so badly in his life. Maggie's little hands clutched at Sarah's sleeve. "Please don't let him take me." Sarah tightened her grip around Maggie, her eyes flashing with protective fury. Bo spoke up, his deep voice like a thunderclap. "You need to leave. Now." The man's jaw twitched. He looked at Maggie one last time, then exhaled. "Fine." He turned and walked toward the door, but Jack wasn't done. "I see you near her again, and I'll make sure you regret it." The man smirked. "Guess we'll see, won't we?" Then he was gone, swallowed by the storm. Jack's fists were still clenched, his heart hammering in his chest. Maggie was trembling, tears sliding silently down her face. Jack knelt beside her, his voice softer now. "He's not gonna hurt you again, sweetheart. I promise." And for the first time since he found her on the highway, Maggie believed him. A dangerous encounter. Jack Callahan didn't move until the door of the diner slammed shut behind Maggie's so-called uncle. His body remained tense, fists clenched so tight that his knuckles were white. Every instinct screamed at him to chase the bastard down, to make him feel even a fraction of the fear Maggie must have felt out there in the freezing cold. But he couldn't. Maggie needed him more than his anger did. Jack exhaled slowly, forcing himself to focus. The entire diner had gone silent. The truckers at the counter watched with careful eyes. Carla's face was pale with concern, and Bo still had one hand gripping the shotgun he kept under the register. Maggie clung to Sarah like a lifeline, her small body trembling with silent sobs. Jack finally moved, kneeling beside her. His voice was low, but steady. "He's gone, sweetheart. He's not gonna touch you. I won't let him." Maggie sniffled, her face buried in Sarah's sleeve, but she nodded. Jack glanced up at Sarah. "How is she?" Sarah ran a soothing hand over Maggie's back, her expression still tense. "She's stable. But after that, she needs more than just warmth. She needs safety, Jack." Jack nodded. "Then that's what she'll get. The truth about Maggie." Bo stepped forward, rubbing his jaw. "Jack, that guy ain't gonna just walk away. You saw how he looked at her." Jack's stomach twisted. Bo was right. That man had come here with a purpose. He looked down at Maggie, his voice gentle. "Sweetheart, can you tell me something?" Maggie wiped her nose on her sleeve. Her voice was so small, so fragile. "What?" Jack hesitated, then asked, "Did your uncle take care of you? Or did he hurt you?" Maggie stiffened. Her fingers gripped Sarah's sleeve tighter. He wasn't nice. He yelled a lot. Hit me sometimes. When Mommy left, he said it was my fault." Jack felt something inside him snap. He had suspected, but hearing it from Maggie's own lips, that made it real. He forced himself to keep calm. "Do you know where your mommy went?" Maggie shook her head. She told me she was going to find us a new house. She said she'd come back. Her lips trembled, but she never did. Jack exchanged a glance with Sarah. The implications were clear. Maggie's mother had either abandoned her or something had happened to her. And now, that man outside had been her only guardian. Jack's jaw tightened. Not anymore. The Truckers' Brotherhood. The CB radio on Jack's belt crackled. "Titan, you copy?" Jack snatched it up. "Go ahead, Road Dog. Got some news. You were right about that guy at mile marker 186. That truck he was driving. Stolen. Registered to someone else 3 states over." Jack's grip tightened. Sam continued. "I called in a favor with a buddy of mine in highway patrol. That guy's got a record. DUI, domestic disturbances, restraining orders, you name it." Jack's stomach churned. "And now he's out in this storm, looking for a little girl he abandoned to freeze to death. Dan right he is. And you better believe he ain't done." Jack looked at Maggie, who had tucked herself against Sarah's side like a wounded bird. No way in hell was he handing her over to some dangerous son of a bastard. His voice turned to steel. "Then we make sure he never gets the chance. A plan forms." Jack turned back to Bo. "We can't stay here. Not if he's still out there." Bo nodded. "I got a buddy at the sheriff's office. I'll call him. Get a unit out here." Jack shook his head. "No good. Storm's still blocking most roads, and that bastard's probably watching us. We gotta move." Carla stepped forward, arms crossed. "Where can you take her?" Jack's mind raced. Then an idea hit him. "There's a women's shelter 2 towns over. My wife works with them. She can get Maggie in safely, no questions asked." Sarah nodded. "That's the best option. But how do we get there?" Jack thought for a moment. "If I take the highway, he'll follow me. But if we go the back roads, we might just slip away unnoticed." Bo grinned. "I like it. You need a head start." Jack smirked. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Bo chuckled, turning toward one of the other truckers. "Hey, Dave, you up for a little convoy?" A burly, bearded man at the counter grinned. "Hell yeah, I am. What's the plan?" Jack grinned. "We give him something to chase. The Great Escape." 15 minutes later, Jack stood beside Iron Titan, securing Maggie safely inside the cab. Sarah was coming with them. She wouldn't leave Maggie's side. Across the lot, 3 identical trucks idled in a row, each of them dark-colored freightliners, just like Jack's rig. Bo's plan was simple. They'd all leave at the same time, heading in different directions. If Maggie's uncle was watching, he'd have no way of knowing which truck had her. Jack leaned down, tucking the blankets tighter around Maggie. "You ready, sweetheart?" She nodded, her tiny fingers gripping his coat sleeve. "Are you coming too?" Jack smiled, ruffling her hair. "You bet, kiddo." Sarah climbed into the passenger seat, making sure Maggie was safe. Bo stood nearby, watching the storm. "You sure you want to do this alone, Jack?" Jack smirked. "I got Iron Titan. Ain't nobody catching me on the road." Bo chuckled. "Fair enough. Just don't let that bastard get near her." Jack's smirk faded. He won't. With one final nod, he climbed into his truck and fired up the engine. The rumble of Iron Titan shook the air. One by one, the other trucks peeled out, heading into the blizzard in different directions. Jack waited, watching. Then, out of the corner of his eye, movement. A black pickup truck sitting at the edge of the lot. Headlights off. Jack's gut twisted. He's here. He threw the truck into gear. "Hold on, ladies. We're not stopping till we're safe." And with that, Iron Titan roared into the storm, carrying Jack, Maggie, and Sarah toward whatever awaited them beyond the snow. The storm and the hunter. The storm swallowed Iron Titan whole. Jack Callahan gritted his teeth, his fingers locked around the steering wheel as his 18-wheeler cut through the blizzard like a warship in rough seas. Snowflakes pounded the windshield. dancing in the glow of his headlights. Ice clung to the wipers, forcing him to lean forward and squint through the swirling wood out. Maggie, wrapped in thick blankets, lay curled up in the passenger seat. Sarah, the former pediatric nurse, sat beside her, keeping a watchful eye on both the girl and the road ahead. Jack checked the side mirror. Nothing but darkness and snow. But he knew better. Maggie's uncle was out there. And if Jack had read the bastard right, he wouldn't just let them go. Sarah's voice cut through the tense silence. How long until we reach the shelter? Jack glanced at the GPS. 50 miles. But in this weather, could be an hour, maybe more. Sarah exhaled, pressing a warm hand to Maggie's forehead. She's still too cold. Her body's recovering, but she needs rest and safety. Jack nodded. That's exactly what we're getting her. Sarah met his eyes. And what about you, Jack? You really willing to fight this guy? Jack let out a low chuckle. Sarah, I've been hauling cargo through every nightmare road this country has to offer. I've been through tornadoes, floods, and black ice. You think one coward with a pickup truck is gonna scare me? Sarah smirked. I didn't say you were scared, but I can tell when a man's ready for a fight. Jack just nodded. She wasn't wrong. He was more than ready. The chase begins. Then, headlights. In the mirror, Jack's chest tightened, a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness. Emerging from the snow, the black pickup truck, its silhouette barely visible through the storm. The bastard had found them. Sarah cursed under her breath. It's that. Yeah, Jack said. Hold on. He gripped the wheel tighter and pushed the accelerator. The massive rig groaned as its tires fought against the icy road, picking up speed. The pickup truck behind them followed suit, closing the distance. Jack flicked on the CB radio. Road dog, you copy? Sam's voice crackled through the speaker. I'm here, Titan. What's up? That son of a bastard found us. He's tailing me, and he's not backing off. A pause. Then, Sam's voice hardened. Where you at? Back road off Route 57, 30 miles east of Clifton. I'm 20 minutes out. But Jack, you're on your own till then. Jack smirked, shifting gears. Wouldn't have it any other way. The pickup truck gained on them. Its high beams flashed, then disappeared, as if the driver was trying to intimidate him. Jack wasn't impressed. A game of cat and mouse. Jack knew this road well. He'd driven it dozens of times, a winding stretch through deep forests, narrow bridges, and sharp turns. It wasn't made for high-speed chases, but Jack also knew something else. An 18-wheeler wasn't just a truck. It was a weapon. The pickup truck inched closer. The bastard was testing him, pushing forward before pulling back, waiting for an opening. Jack watched, calculated. Then, the truck made its move. The pickup accelerated, swerving to the side, trying to overtake him. Jack didn't hesitate. He jerked the wheel slightly, just enough to cut him off. Iron Titan swung wide, blocking the passing lane. The pickup truck skidded, nearly losing control on the icy road. Jack let out a sharp laugh. Not today, asshole. Sarah's knuckles were white as she gripped the dashboard. Jack, I really hope you know what you're doing. Jack's smirk didn't fade. I always know what I'm doing. Sometimes I just make it up as I go. Maggie speaks. A small, trembling voice rose from the blankets. Is it him? Jack's grip tightened. He glanced down. Maggie was awake, her eyes wide, fear creeping into them. Sarah turned and brushed a strand of hair from the girl's face. Yes, sweetheart. But don't worry. Jack's got this. Maggie swallowed hard. He's not gonna let me go. Jack's jaw tightened. He already did, kid. His voice was firm. And we're not letting him take you back. The pickup truck rammed into the back of the trailer. The whole truck shuddered. Sarah gasped. He's trying to run us off the road. Jack's nostrils flared. All right, asshole. You wanna play dirty. He shifted gears, and pushed forward. Iron Titan roared down the icy road. The pickup followed, relentless. The last mile. Jack knew he couldn't shake him forever. The roads were too slick, and the bastard behind him was getting desperate. Then he saw it. A tunnel. A tight, narrow passage carved through the rock, barely wide enough for two vehicles. And Jack knew exactly what he had to do. He turned to Sarah. "Hold on to Maggie. And whatever happens, stay down." Sarah paled. "Jack, what the hell are you about to do?" Jack grinned. "Just making sure he never follows us again." The tunnel loomed ahead. The pickup truck sped up behind him, its tires barely gripping the icy road. Jack waited, timed it perfectly. And then he slammed the brakes. The ABS engaged, the truck skidding just enough to force the pickup driver to react. The bastard tried to swerve. Too late. The truck's trailer clipped the side mirror of the pickup. The sudden impact sent the vehicle spinning out of control. Jack caught a glimpse of the man's face. Pure panic. The pickup slammed into the tunnel wall, metal crunching against stone. Jack didn't stop. Iron Titan powered through the tunnel, leaving the wreckage behind. Sarah turned in her seat, watching as the tunnel's exit swallowed the destroyed pickup in shadows. Jack took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. "Told you, no one's taking her back." The aftermath. 15 minutes later, Jack pulled into the small town where the women's shelter was located. A local sheriff's cruiser was waiting for them, lights flashing but sirens off. As Jack stepped out of Iron Titan, a familiar face greeted him, his wife, Linda. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked up and hugged him. Jack let out a breath, relaxing for the first time that night. Maggie was safe, and that bastard was done. As Maggie was led inside by social workers, she turned back one last time. "Jack?" He knelt down. "Yeah, sweetheart." She hesitated, then threw her arms around his neck. Jack felt a lump rise in his throat. "Thank you for stopping." Jack smiled, ruffling her hair. "Always, kid." And as he watched her disappear into the shelter, he knew this wasn't just another road. This was the road that mattered. The fallout and the promise. The storm had finally passed. Jack Callahan stood outside the small women's shelter, his heavy boots crunching on the snow-covered pavement. The early morning sky had started to clear, a soft purple glow bleeding into the horizon. But the tension in his chest hadn't faded. Maggie was safe inside, wrapped in warmth, surrounded by people who would protect her. His job should have been done, but something deep inside told him this wasn't over. Sheriff Donovan adjusted his belt, watching Jack carefully. The man was built like an old oak tree, broad-shouldered, solid, and carrying the weight of years spent dealing with the worst kind of people. "You really did a number on that guy," Donovan finally said, breaking the silence. Jack crossed his arms. Wasn't much of a fight. He lost before it even started. The sheriff nodded. Highway patrol found his truck. Totaled. He bailed before they could pick him up, but my boys will find him. Hell, half the county's looking for him. Jack's jaw tightened. That bastard's not gonna stop. Donovan let out a heavy sigh. "You're probably right. And that's what worries me." Jack glanced toward the shelter. Maggie was inside, but for how long? Foster care. Court hearings. She wasn't just a lost kid. She was a witness. That meant her uncle had every reason to find her. Jack clenched his fists. "Then we make damn sure he doesn't get the chance." Donovan gave him a long, measured look. Then he exhaled. "You're not gonna walk away from this, are you?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. A family reunion. The shelter's front door opened, and Linda Callahan stepped out. Jack's wife had always been the steady rock in his life, the person who reminded him that the world still had good in it. Her sharp eyes softened when they met his. "Jack," she said gently, "she's asking for you." Jack blinked. "Maggie." Linda nodded. Jack followed her inside. The shelter was small but warm, filled with soft lights and quiet voices. The smell of fresh coffee and something sweet, maybe cinnamon, drifted through the air. It was the kind of place that tried to make broken people feel whole again. Maggie sat on a couch, wrapped in an oversized sweater, her small hands gripping a cup of hot chocolate. Her big brown eyes lifted when Jack walked in. Jack knelt beside her. "Hey, sweetheart." Maggie hesitated, then whispered, "Is he gone?" Jack nodded. "He won't be bothering you anymore." Maggie swallowed hard. What if he finds me? Jack's chest ached. This kid had been through hell, and she still couldn't believe she was safe. "Listen to me, Maggie," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I don't care where he goes, or what he tries. You are never going back to him. Not ever. That's a promise." Maggie studied his face, searching for something. Finally, she nodded. Then, she did something that nearly broke Jack's heart. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small, delicate, and still a little cold. But her grip was strong. Jack swallowed the lump in his throat. "You get some rest, kid," he murmured. "You earned it." Maggie gave a small nod. "Are you leaving?" Jack hesitated. Linda stepped in gently. "Jack's got a long drive ahead of him, honey, but we'll make sure you're taken care of." Maggie's fingers curled slightly around Jack's hand, like she didn't want to let go. Jack took a slow breath. "I'll be back," he promised. "You'll see me again." Maggie looked up at him, her lips twitching into a small, hopeful smile. "Okay. Loose ends and a dangerous road ahead." Jack stepped outside the shelter, the cold air hitting him like a slap. Linda followed, her arms crossed. "You're not done with this, are you?" she asked quietly. Jack shook his head. "No, not while that bastard's still out there." Linda sighed. "I figured." She stepped forward, pressing her hand against his chest, right over his heart. "Be careful, Jack. You have nothing to prove." Jack kissed her forehead. "It's not about proving anything. It's about making sure this doesn't happen again." Linda studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Jack turned and walked back to his truck. As he climbed into the cab, his CB radio crackled to life. "Titan, you copy?" Jack grabbed the receiver. "Go ahead, road dog." Sam's voice came through, serious. "Just got word from Smokey. That bastard's got friends. He might not be working alone." Jack's blood went cold. "How many?" "Don't know. But enough that the sheriff's department is on edge." Jack exhaled sharply. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. He flicked the switch, turning on every light on his dashboard. The deep blue glow illuminated the interior, casting long shadows across the seats. The road stretched ahead, dark and full of unknowns. Jack revved the engine. If Maggie's uncle had friends, then Jack had brothers. And truckers. They watched out for their own. The road to justice. Jack Callahan had driven through some of the worst conditions a man could imagine. Hurricanes that shook his rig like a toy, tornadoes that tore through highways, and blizzards so thick he couldn't see 5 feet in front of him. But tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't just hauling cargo. He was carrying the weight of something much bigger. Justice, vengeance, and the undeniable promise that Maggie's uncle would never hurt her again. The CB radio crackled. "Titan, you copy?" Jack grabbed the receiver. "Go ahead, road dog." Sam's voice came through, sharp and serious. "Bad news, brother. That bastard's got backup. More than just a couple of guys. We're hearing talk of at least 4, maybe 5. All spread out. They're looking for you." Jack's grip on the wheel tightened. "Where?" "They got eyes near the state line. Some of them are staking out truck stops, waiting for you to slip up." Jack's jaw clenched. He should have known. A man like Maggie's uncle wouldn't take losing easily. He had connections, the kind that skulked in the shadows, hiding behind truck stops, parking lots, and old forgotten roads. But what he didn't know, Jack had connections too. And truckers never forget their own. Calling in the Brotherhood. Jack flicked through his CB channels. "This is Iron Titan, calling out to anyone on the road. I got trouble coming my way. Need a favor?" The response was instant. "This is Hammerhead. You got my ears, Titan. Big Ben here. What's the situation?" "Name's Whiskey Mike. I'm rolling through your side of the woods." "Talk to me, Titan." Jack's lips curled into a grim smile. "There it is. The Brotherhood." He exhaled, voice steady. "I got a little girl who needs protecting, and a group of bastards who think they can take her back. They're hunting me down. I say we turn the tables." A moment of silence. Then, laughter. "You hear that, boys?" Whiskey Mike's voice rang through the CB. "Sounds like Titan wants to run the hunters into a trap." "Dan right," Jack said. "And I say we show them why you never mess with truckers." The responses came one by one. "I'm in." "Hell yes. These guys don't know who they're messing with." Jack let out a breath. He had an army now. And tonight, they'd hunt the hunters. The setup. Jack pulled off the main highway onto a deserted stretch of road. The kind of place nobody paid attention to. The kind of place men like Maggie's uncle thought they could do whatever they wanted. Not tonight. Within minutes, a convoy of 18-wheelers rumbled into place, their headlights off, their engines purring low like lions waiting to strike. Jack climbed out of his cab, his boots crunching against the frozen ground. He turned to the men gathered around him. Fellow truckers, road warriors, the kind of men and women who spent their lives on the asphalt, watching, listening, always ready to step up when needed. Sam stood beside him, arms crossed. "You really think this is gonna work?" Jack smirked. "They expect a single truck. They don't expect a whole damn fleet." The plan was simple. They'd spread out, making it look like Jack was still on the run. They'd let Maggie's uncle and his crew chase ghosts through different truck stops, wrong exits, dead ends. Then, when they least expected it, they'd bring the hammer down. The trap springs shut. Jack waited, watching the distant glow of headlights bouncing through the night. Here they come. A black SUV rolled into view, slowing as it approached. Two more vehicles followed, a pickup truck and a dark sit-in. Jack cracked his knuckles. The CB buzzed in his ear. "Titan, we got eyes on him." Jack took a deep breath. "Wait for my signal." The SUV came to a stop. Jack stepped forward. And there he was. Maggie's uncle climbed out, his breath fogging in the cold night air. The bastard looked worse for wear, his face bruised from the crash, his coat torn, but his eyes still burned with that same ugly arrogance. "You really thought you could just take what's mine, Callahan?" he sneered. Jack tilted his head. "You really think she was yours?" The man smirked. "She's my blood. You don't get to decide what happens to her." Jack's fists clenched. "You left her to die in the cold. You piece of asterisk. You lost the right to call her family the second you did that." The man's smirk faded. Behind him, his crew, 4 men, all just as rotten, shifted, their hands hovering near their jackets. Jack saw it coming before it happened. The uncle's hand moved toward his belt. Jack didn't hesitate. He lifted his fingers, snapped, and all hell broke loose. The trucker's justice. Engines roared. Headlights blazed to life. The entire convoy, 10 18-wheelers, lit up like a goddamn stadium. Maggie's uncle and his men were blinded. They stumbled back, cursing, shouting in panic. Then, now, a massive semi-truck pulled forward, blocking their exit. Another cut off the road behind them. The 3 vehicles were trapped. The truckers stepped forward. Sam, Whiskey Mike, Big Ben, each of them built like a damn wall of muscle. Maggie's uncle reached for his gun. Jack was faster. He grabbed the bastard by the collar, slammed him against the hood of his own car, and growled, "You think you're tough, huh?" The man struggled. "This ain't your fight." Jack leaned in. "It is now." Then the flashing lights of police cruisers lit up the road. Sheriff Donovan had arrived. The men tried to run. They didn't get far. The truckers closed in, forcing them to the ground. The sheriff's men swept in, guns drawn, locking them in handcuffs. Jack stood over Maggie's uncle, looking down at the pathetic excuse of a man. "You don't ever get to see her again." The man spat at his feet. "You're just a truck driver." Jack smirked. "Dan right I am." And then, with sirens howling, they hauled the bastard away. A new beginning. Hours later, Jack sat outside the shelter. Maggie curled up beside him, watching the sunrise. She looked up at him. "He's really gone." Jack nodded. "Yeah, kid, he's gone." She hesitated, then whispered, "Where do I go now?" Jack exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. "Wherever you want, sweetheart. But you're not alone. You'll never be alone again." Maggie thought for a long time. Then she smiled softly. "Thank you, Jack." Jack put an arm around her shoulder, staring at the horizon. This was the best cargo he'd ever hauled, and the best road he'd ever traveled. Because tonight, Jack Callahan hadn't just delivered a girl to safety. He'd delivered justice. And as long as he was out there, no child would be left behind again. A road that never ends. The first light of dawn stretched across the sky, golden rays breaking through the remnants of the storm. The shelter's porch was quiet, the world around them finally at peace. But inside Jack Callahan, a storm still brewed. He sat on the wooden steps, his boots scuffing against the frost-covered ground. Beside him, Maggie, wrapped in a thick sweater far too big for her, hugged her knees to her chest. Her brown eyes, still heavy with exhaustion, stared out at the horizon. Jack had never been good with words, especially with kids, but something about Maggie made him want to try. "You warm enough, sweetheart?" he asked, voice low. Maggie nodded but didn't say anything. She just hugged herself tighter. Jack exhaled. He knew that silence. It wasn't comfort, it was fear. Fear that this peace wouldn't last. Fear that someone else would come along and take it away. She'd been let down by too many people already. So Jack did the only thing he could. He made her a promise. "You don't have to worry anymore, Maggie." She finally turned to look at him. "You're sure?" Jack nodded. "I'm sure." She hesitated, then murmured, "I don't have anywhere to go." Jack clenched his fists. He'd been thinking about that all night. The system would step in soon. Foster care, social workers, hearings. He'd seen enough of the world to know that sometimes that was just another kind of hell. Linda had already told him the shelter would do their best to find Maggie a good home. But Jack didn't trust the system. He trusted himself. A conversation that changed everything. Jack looked toward the shelter's doorway. Linda stood there, arms crossed, watching them carefully. She already knew what he was thinking. She sighed. "Jack." Jack turned to Maggie. "You said you don't have anywhere to go. What if you did?" Maggie blinked. "What do you mean?" Jack ran a hand through his graying hair. He had never in his life considered raising another kid. His own daughter, Emily, was grown now, with kids of her own. His life had been the road. But maybe the road wasn't everything. "I mean, what if you came with me?" Maggie's eyes widened. Linda stepped forward sharply. "Jack, we can't just." "Why not?" Jack turned to her, his voice steady. "Why not us?" Linda opened her mouth, then closed it. Jack sighed. "Look, I know how this works. Paperwork, social workers, background checks. But if the alternative is throwing her back into a system where she might end up with another piece of asterisk like her uncle, I'd rather fight for her myself." Silence. Linda studied Maggie. Maggie looked at Jack. Finally, Maggie whispered, "You'd want me to stay." Jack's throat tightened. More than anything. The little girl didn't move for a long time. Then, without warning, she launched herself into Jack's arms. Jack caught her, stunned as she buried her face into his chest. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Jack closed his eyes. That was it. That was the moment everything changed. A family on the road. A month later, the legal battle began. Jack and Linda met with social workers, filled out paperwork, and fought tooth and nail to keep Maggie in their care. The trucker community backed them up. Every person Jack had ever helped, every connection he'd made over 30 years on the road, came forward. They called, wrote letters, and testified on his behalf. The judge listened, and in the end, Jack Callahan became Maggie's legal guardian. He stood outside the courthouse, staring at the document in his hands. It was official now. Maggie was his. She looked up at him, gripping the hem of her new jacket. A proper one this time, warm and thick, not the ragged thing she had worn the night he found her. "We did it?" she asked hesitantly. Jack smirked. "Yeah, kid, we did it." Maggie grinned. "So, what happens now?" Jack looked out at Iron Titan, parked at the curb. The truck had been his home for 30 years. Now it had room for two. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small keychain, a tiny metal truck, weathered and worn from years on the road. He had carried it for decades. He held it out to Maggie. She took it, running her fingers over the cool metal. Jack smiled. "Now, we drive." Maggie beamed, and together, they climbed into the truck. The engine roared to life, the road stretching endlessly before them. And for the first time in a long time, Jack Callahan wasn't driving alone.